By now, we've all heard about girl math, boy math, and dog math. And perhaps you've heard about child-free math, which inspired today's episode where we're going to ask the question, does it really pay to be child-free? Hey, welcome to Unapologetically Child-Free, the everything that you need in one place podcast for a life without kids. I'm Maggie Dickens, a licensed therapist and your child-free hype woman, here with candid conversations about friendships, lifestyle, and everything that defines our child-free life. So join me on this journey where we get to live life unapologetically. If you've been around the child-free community for any amount of time, perhaps even just the last couple of months, you may have seen a ton of different memes and reels and other images talking about the average cost of raising a child is somewhere between 230 to about 260,000 US dollars for ages 0 to 17, 18 years old. And that depends on the research that you're looking at. And so there's a lot of these jokes out there that are talking about, in the vein of the girl math and the boy math and the dog math and all of those things, that if on average it's about 15,000 US dollars per year to raise a child, then I've got 15,000 US dollars extra per year to go travel, to spend on myself, to do all of these kinds of things, quote unquote, before I've even spent any money. I think it's really misleading to specifically focus on, if I don't have a child, then somehow I have this surplus of cash, that somehow there's an extra 250-ish thousand US dollars sitting in my bank account. And boy, do I wish that were true. However, it isn't. I promised we would answer the question, does it pay to be child free? Let's first talk about the costs associated with having children. And these costs often are in the top 3 to 5 reasons why many people choose to not have children. So it is important to talk about these specifics in detail. Keep in mind that most recent research going back from about 2015 upwards to about 2022 have estimated the cost of raising a child from 0 to 17, 18 years old is anywhere between 230,000 to 260,000 US dollars. That's on average. So that breaks down to approximately 15,000 US dollars. What in the heck is that money being spent on? Because if I think about adding an additional 15 grand into my budget today, I don't know where it would come from. Aside from the little bit of savings that I'm able to squirrel away, that would be gone. And that would hurt my soul a little bit. So where is this $15,000 going? Why is it costing that much money on average to raise a child every year? And remember, averages are skewed by extremes. And this is also not only the extremes of the high earners and the low spenders, as well as it's being averaged out from 0 to 17, 18. So some years will be more expensive than others. So just talking the outgoing money, we're talking education. So in some areas, preschools and schools in general have fees associated to them in order to be in a quote unquote a good school, whatever that looks like for you. That may be tuition. If you're in public school, that's paying for school supplies. In the United States, we have a very underfunded education system, in my opinion, and the opinion of millions of other people. And that means that parents, as well as the teachers themselves, are having to increase their spending for the classroom. And so you've got educational expenses. Some parents are still wanting to save money for some type of post high school education, trade school, associates, college, etc. And as a citizen of the United States, and we're talking US dollars, we have to factor in that there's a cost of healthcare. And I don't have the statistics in front of me because it just makes me want to just scream. The cost of simply birthing a child is upwards of 8 to 12,000 US dollars out of pocket. This is after your insurance is kicked in. That's just simply having a baby. And then we have to think about paying for insurance premiums every month for those children, vaccinations and medications. We know that kids are just germy little things and they're constantly sick, ear infections and colds, all of those things. You're going to need that child to have some health care. And so in the United States, that's a pretty large expense. One thing that a lot of people don't think about when they're thinking of how much will it really cost to have a child is some of the added expenses that you're already spending. It's just going to go up a few dozen percent. So going from a studio to a one-bedroom apartment, perhaps. Or for some people, they want the 4,000 square foot home where all four kids have their own bedroom and there's a game room and there's all these things. So again, we're looking at averages, but typically the average size of your accommodation is going to increase and your average grocery budget is going to increase and your average just fun money, if you have that in your budget, that's going to increase. So when I see on Reddit, on social media where people say, I don't spend any extra money on my child. Either this child is fully neglected and is unfed, unclothed, unhoused, or this person was already overspending in food, shelter, and clothing. And so they just shifted their spending from themselves to the other person. Possible. Or they're not factoring in that for one person, it was costing, let's make up money, 100 US dollars for groceries per week, and now it's 150. That doesn't feel like a ton for some people, and for others, that's a completely inaccessible leap. Now, we've talked about a couple of ways that expenses go up when you have a child. And again, this is one of the many reasons that people choose to not have kids is to not increase their spending in these areas and in order to save money or to not have that expense. Because this is not an expense for a baby. This is not an expense for a kid. This is an expense for a lifetime, right? When we think about parenting, this 250-ish thousand US dollars is from 0 to 17, 18. We know there are expenses in utero. There's healthcare costs. There is the time away from work that causes a loss in income. Specifically for women, the research shows that women are not either seeking out or being extended promotion opportunities because they have kids. They're taking off work a lot more than their male counterparts. And many times, one parent will decide to take multiple months or even multiple years out of the workforce in order to be present with the children, which, while it is not an outgoing expense, it is still costing the family or the person money. Now, if we contrast this with a child-free person, are we going to see the exact opposite? Are we going to see that every single child-free person is sitting with an extra 15K in their bank account every year? I don't believe that's true because what I always say is not having a child doesn't make life easy. It makes life easier. So if I have a job that affords me, like I do, I have a great counseling business and it allows me to pay my bills and squirrel away a couple of extra dollars every week to put into a retirement fund so that I can take care of myself when I'm older. Okay. Having a child would take away from that saving and it would make my life harder because I would need to work more or I would need to take a look at my finances and see how I would be able to incorporate the increase in education, healthcare, and other daily expenses. Simply not having a kid doesn't give you extra money. What it does is it is not causing you to be in any more debt. It is potentially giving you extra a week to help you build up some type of a savings that you wouldn't otherwise have. And I think it's important to talk about this and to normalize that not every child-free person is going to be the rich aunt who comes in and spoils their nieces and nephews, or is going to be the person who is taking elaborate trips throughout the world. And so if we think about it from that point of view, where simply not having a kid doesn't mean that a treasure chest of cash gets left at your bank with your name on it. Instead, what it means is you are, in theory, in more control of what you do with your money. So whether or not you are making $5 a week or $5 million a week, you have a greater choice in what you're doing with that money, especially for those that are making that $5 a week. You're not going into debt at the same rate that you would if you were to have one or more children. Additionally, one of the things that we see in our society is the ongoing societal pressures to quote unquote keep up with the Joneses. And this has been just seen exponentially through the climb of social media and social media influencers and the family and mommy bloggers that is constantly putting out in front of parents that they need the new gadget, whatever that happens to be. So, this is another place where people can go into debt as a parent, or that they are spending even more than that 15,000 per kid per year amount, because there's the desire to give their kid more, to provide even more, to have the bigger house, to have the bigger car, to make sure that their kids are in the latest clothing or have the latest gadgets themselves. And I think it's wonderful when you have that financial privilege to give your children something that they're wanting and you get to parent the way that you want to parent. However, this is factoring into the increasing costs of parenthood. And on the flip side of this societal pressure to keep up with the Joneses and have your family look a certain way, there's also this societal concept that having this intact nuclear family that includes 2 parents and multiple children, the white picket fence and the border collie and all of those things, is that equals financial success, which kind of boggles my mind because it costs so much money to have these extras, to have the white picket fence, to have the multiple kids, to have the animals, that all costs money. So if you think about it from that perspective, sure, you're successful in spending a lot of money that you may or may not be making. And when we're keeping up with the Joneses, it's also important to remember that most companies out there have embraced the idea of planned obsolescence. So if you don't know what that means, it's basically saying that when our grandparents talk about back in my day, you could buy a vacuum cleaner and it would last 20 years. Yes, it would. It absolutely would, because it was built to last. Companies prided themselves on this is the last vacuum cleaner you're ever going to need. And companies today are purposefully building things that cannot be repaired, that are easily broken, and that have parts that will eventually wear out. And so you have to buy a new one. For example, I had a part on my washing machine here break. It was just the power button. And my landlord told me that she was quoted €200 to fix the button. And I think a brand new washing machine is like €250, something like that. So she's getting a new one. And that boggles my mind. The reduce, reuse, recycle, daughter of my mother that I am, that hurts my heart from a landfill point of view, as well as just thinking about the costs that we continue to put out there. Whether it's a washing machine, a vacuum cleaner, the clothes that we're wearing, everything is meant to be replaced. And so that's going to end up costing us more and more money, which is why I think we're seeing the cost of raising children increase as well. This is why it's important for me to talk about this because I have had people reach out in my DMs and say, I chose not to be a parent because I knew I couldn't afford to raise a child because I can barely take care of myself. If you are child free and you are not feeling as if you are the rich auntie coming in and showering people with gifts, or that you aren't able to take a world adventure every year, that's okay and that's normal. That's to be expected. I've had so many people reach out and say something very similar to this, and I don't want to normalize what I've done. Becoming an expat is not the norm. The norm is saying, okay, I'm responsible enough, I'm mature enough to recognize my resources are not going to extend beyond myself. So please know that if this is you, you're not alone. And my hope is that with not having children, that the child free are able to maximize the freedom that they've given themselves to find more fulfilling careers, to find advancement in careers that they desire to advance in, to potentially find more economically beneficial careers versus feeling held back because they're not able to move, because they can't take the job across town since they need to be close to the school. There are these limitations that being a parent puts on a person. And by choosing to be child free, we do get this little bit of extra freedom. And it's what we do with that freedom that may help us have greater financial experience. We live in a world with a massive wealth gap. In the United States, the number of people who are a $400 emergency away from not paying their rent is so high. So, answering the question, does it really pay to be child free? Absolutely. It pays in freedom, it pays in opportunities to seek out career benefits and opportunities to stay out of debt or out of significant debt, opportunities to not fall into the keeping up with the Joneses. There's the opportunity for some to save more money than our friends with kids. Choosing to be child free has the ability to put or keep more money in your pocket. Absolutely. But believe me, just like babies aren't delivered by a stork, not having a baby does not mean that a pirate is delivering a treasure chest with your name on it. So you may have been thinking that this episode was going to be a little bit more uplifting or maybe a little bit more lighthearted. Today we were talking the financials. Does it pay to be child free financially? Absolutely. But we needed to know all of those caveats of how and where that money comes from because it isn't just dropping from the sky. There are other ways that it pays to be child free. And we're going to talk about that in future episodes, specifically with freedom, with time, those kinds of things. So if that's interesting to you, drop a comment. Let me know, what ways do you think it pays to be child free? And I will talk to you next week. Ciao, y'all.